for the Agile community. www.Agile.FM.
Thanks for tuning in for another episode of Agile.FM. Today I have two guests with me. I have Ralph Jocham and Don McGreal. Ralph is with Effective Agile and his Twitter handle is RJOACHAM. And Don McGreal is with Improving, and he has a website you might be very, very familiar with, the Tasty Cupcakes. Don McGreal's Twitter handle is DonMCGREAL. The reason why we're here today is with these two professional Scrum trainers is they released a book, and that book is hitting the marketplace on the 14th of June 2018. It's on pre-order right now, and the book is about professional product owner. That is the title of the book. It's first of all, welcome to the podcast, both of you.
Thanks, Joe.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yes, so we want to talk a little bit about the book, obviously, but we want to use the book as to frame a conversation a little bit about product ownership in general. So, Ralph, you are based out of Switzerland and Don out of Texas in the United States. I have a few logistical questions here. How long have you worked on this book together?
Well, it's been a year and a half, would you say? Ralph, maybe a little bit longer than that.
It's long. I mean, it depends a little bit if you really could compress the time. So we started off in May 2016. Mm-hmm. I remember because I was at the Scrum Day London conference and I was having a chat with Don West, who was the CEO of Scrum.org. And at some point, he clearly hinted at me, "Hey, Ralph, and Don and I, we both are the stewards for the PSPO, Product Owner Training Material at Scrum.org." So he basically hinted at me, "Hey, Ralph, I think we need a good book about product ownership." Hint. And so I just said, I was toying with the idea about writing a book for some time, and this was clearly that's it. Mm-hmm. But I was a little bit afraid of doing it completely on my own, and so I reached out to Don and just, "Hey, Don, Dave talked to me. How do you feel about writing a book with me?" And this is how the whole thing started.
Right, awesome. So how from a writing's perspective, how did this all work out between the Switzerland and the United States? Just typical distributed challenges, or how did you overcome the writing?
We basically, it was between the two main tools was Skype and Google Docs, and we were doing a lot of pair writing. Like we did, I think, much better than I ever anticipated. We were literally writing stuff at the same time over Skype in the same document with Google, right. And we kept a pretty good cadence. You know, almost every week we got together for at least a few hours, spent a lot of time in early mornings on weekends. Then it was afternoon for Ralph, or I would take a lunch break while he was at home, maybe in a hotel room, while he was teaching a class. Mm-hmm. And we did a pretty good job of just every time we finished a meeting, we would just schedule the next one. And I think by the end of it, how many did we have? 70-something meetings?
I kept track of that. I think we have 73, if I don't miscount it, so 73 Skype calls, and some of them lasted only 1 hour, some of them lasted maybe 5 hours, something like that. So gives them an idea.
Yeah, intense. A workday after a workday then.
After
teaching,
Awesome. Yeah, and we're both, like Ralph is the busiest trainer in the world for Scrum.org. Mm-hmm. He taught last year taught 1,000 people in 70-something classes. So, I really admire his discipline, which gave me a lot of energy to keep going and keep my end of the bargain up too.
Yeah, so distribution was not a big obstacle, and actually you used that to your advantage of pushing each other. Awesome.
And there was a time where we decided we got to get face to face. So he flew over to Texas for about 10 days, and we flew to California together. We taught a class out there during that time. But we spent the weekends and I took some time off just to focus on this on the book face to face, and that was a big huge boost to the writing.
Yeah. So the book is.
And I remember When I arrived, so Don picked me up at the airport. He dropped me off my hotel. We had a beer, and then he said, "Yeah, I have a plan. So tomorrow we go about this chapter." So kind of every day a chapter thing. So first 3 days were over, and we haven't even finished the first chapter.
Wow! Wow!
Kind of.
My plan
suddenly,
was.
Yeah.
My plan was that I had written out was in that Saturday we would finish the first chapter, which we had already written part of it, but that actually took a week.
Yeah.
So the value of estimations, right?
Value of estimation and inspection too, right? And adaptation.
Exactly.
How much is the plan worth? But it's a good starting point, right? It's good to ink things in and have a goal. So the book is in the professional Scrum series. I think that's why it's called Professional Product Owner. But what's so special about the word professional in front of the product owner? Somebody who might be interested in product ownership, they're going to find this book on Amazon now. They see the word professional in front of it. Why is that so important for you guys?
So
Go ahead, Don.
It's kind of two double-faceted, because there's also professional is a big part of the Scrum.org mission, right? Creating more of a profession out of software, which we've come, this is an industry where we take people right out of college and go, you coded in HTML before, here's a multi-million-dollar project. Like we don't really have the checks and balances that a lot of other industries do. Mm-hmm. But then deeper than that, we've noticed just specifically on the product owner side, a lot of very, very common anti-patterns out there when it comes to product ownership. And we really wanted to set the record straight, I guess. And that was sort of the theme in the class that we've been teaching so much. And we figured this book would be a perfect companion to the Professional Scrum Product Owner class. Mm-hmm. And it really is about, let's move away from a product owner's job just being about writing up user stories and getting and answering questions all the time. Mm-hmm. They're not the secretary, they're not the scribe for the team. This is a much more strategic product management role. And that was a big theme that we wanted to get right off the bat. We don't even cover Scrum until chapter 5, I believe. Mm-hmm. The first part is strategic. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's really about, being professional, kind of going from a really strategic point of view, but also kind of really try to tie it into, producing value. I think product ownership is really, to a strong degree, about really kind of customer happiness, mm-hmm. producing value. And we all think, kind of the way Don said it, this ties back, because Scrum is everywhere these days, but so many people, they just do mechanical Scrum the way we think about it. And I think that we are still lacking a certain degree of professionalism in that field.
Yeah, the subtitle, it also gives a lot away, right? Leveraging Scrum as a competitive advantage. Why do you think this is so important these days for companies, this competitive advantage? We see a lot about that on the bookshelf around Scrum. But why in particular product ownership? How does that fit into that gap?
We thought about that title a lot. We didn't want to put Scrum in the main piece because this is about product ownership with or without Scrum, or product management, but we wanted to change the perception of Scrum. We didn't want Scrum to be seen as it so often is, as some project management tool that you give IT so they get their act together. Mm-hmm. It is not that. It was never meant to be that. And it's something Ken Schreiber and Jeff Sutherland wrote about in their Software in 30 Days book. This is a competitive advantage. So this is about the product owner role, or imagine a true product manager wanting to be a competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. This is about presenting Scrum in a different way to show that this is the fact that we have something that you can actually ship every sprint. Now, how do you leverage that to validate your hypotheses against the marketplace? Mm-hmm. How do you take what Scrum gives you to create a competitive advantage for your product and your organization? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to a big degree, I think this all separates between being pre-product and post-product. Essentially professionalism and value and competitive advantages is all about having built a product which you can deliver, ship into the marketplace and collect feedback, whether it's the right or wrong one, and then you can basically inspect and adapt. But again, what Don also said about, Scrum is just a way as to manage projects, but this is like, you measure things beforehand, like, lines of code produced, stories completed, and things like that. And this only indicates progress, but it doesn't give you any idea whether you have already value. Mm-hmm. And for value, you need to have a release. And we think kind of this is what we also really try to combine under the aspect of professional product ownership and the generation of value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very cool. I'm here with Ralph Jocham and Don McGreal, and we're talking about the new book, Professional Product Owner. And we're going to touch a little bit on product, the role of a product owner and product ownership more a little bit in general in just a moment. Do you enjoy Agile.FM and listen to the episodes on a regular basis? Is Especially since this podcast is dedicated to Agile, feedback is important. Give us a quick rating or leave a brief review on iTunes. If you'd like to comment on a specific episode, visit the show page on Agile.FM. Thank you. Welcome back. I'm here with Ralph Jocham and Don McGreal, and we just spoke a little bit about the book. We talked about the subtitle of a professional product owner, which was leveraging Scrum as a competitive advantage. What's also interesting is, and it basically is also a manifest to how old the Agile industry already is at this point, but together you have 40 plus years of experience in Agile projects or development of some sort. That's quite a bit. I would like to ask you guys, what has changed in the role of a product owner? What have you seen has changed in the role of a product owner over all these years you have been exposed to that? I remember the early days of Scrum and Agile, and there's a lot of stuff out there now, but any thoughts around the years and years and how that has changed or shaped that role?
So for me, when I read Kent Beck's book, Extreme Programming Explained, Embrace Change, this was kind of started more off from an extreme programming background, and then I probably added Scrum to the mixture around 2001. And I mean, by this time I was still a programmer, and I saw everything from a fairly technical point of view, like good engineering practices. And this is all very important, and it still is. This doesn't change. And then suddenly this process part about working in sprints, and then the Scrum Master who facilitates that, makes all of that happen, works with the team, removes impediments. But somehow for me, it took really like another 2-3 years until I realized how important the product owner is in this whole mixture. I mean, assuming you have this perfect development team who's really good in engineering, they really know what they do, what everything they touch, it works. But at the end of the day, if you build the wrong product, it's still all in vain, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. And what I've noticed the big shift over the years has been, the whole lean startup movement and design thinking, lean UX, and it all converges on this idea of the startup mindset, but not for startup companies, for big companies adopting it. Mm-hmm. And because big companies are now afraid, they're scared. They're seeing like these huge monster companies that have been, market leaders forever are now being usurped by startup companies, like the Uber with $68 billion valuation, or Airbnb, which is threatening some of these well-established hotels that have been around forever. No company, no matter how big, is safe. Technology now is positioning smaller companies to just take that space from the S&P 500 has never been as volatile as it is right now. Mm-hmm. And you see it in the executives now are talking about digital as the new buzzword, and they have chief digital officers. And I think true agile product management is a key point to this. Is like, let's act like a startup company, even in a big company. Let's put out some hypotheses. Let's create some experiments. Mm-hmm. Let's test it. And let's create smart risks. Otherwise, we're in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what makes this role so different, though, in Scrum? It's a role, right? And there are different kind of roles. That the role of a product owner, what I often see is people say, "Yeah, I'm the product manager," but the role doesn't exist, right? In Scrum, so you're the product owner. Some folks see themselves as project managers. Some refer to them as, I have a team that works for me. And the role is very, very different. Maybe you just want to outline to the listeners here the role of a product owner and why this is so important, and why is that so different to product managers or project managers?
I like to talk about titles versus roles. Mm-hmm. So you might have a title of a product manager, or maybe have a title of a project manager, or maybe a business analyst. Ultimately, I don't really care what that title is. It might mean very different things in different organizations. But the role of a product owner, the way we define it in the book, you probably heard us, like Ralph's mentioned it, and I've mentioned a few of them. We've been using these three words, these three V's, we call them: vision, value, and validation. Mm-hmm. And to us, that sums up that role. A product owner's job is to fill in those gaps that we have so often with where the organization's heading and what the team members are doing day in and day out. And we do that with the three V's. So it's establishing a vision is the first V. Establishing and communicating that vision, making sure everybody's aware of it and reminding them of what this vision is, constantly pulling us back towards it. The second one is value. How do we know when we're successful? How do we measure it? What are we trying to change, and do we know if it's changing? And then the last one is validation. In this crazy world, do we even know we're building the right thing? It's kind of impossible now. So what's our plan to validate? It shouldn't just be some basic release plan. What are some things we can do to get out there and validate internally with our experts, but also externally with the marketplace? And so if that's where your passion is, I don't care what your title is, if that's what you want to do, then that to me is the product owner. A product owner is a true agile product manager. That's the way I've been looking at it.
Right. Yeah, very good.
And I think this is really like changing over the time, because you mentioned project management. I think like the first 10 years after the 2000s, like 2005, 6, 7, and so on, most people still thought in projects, and you had like, something to do within the project, but we really want to get away from this project mindset to a product mindset, because that is essentially, because you have a vision about a product, and a product could be pretty much anything. It could be a service, a physical product, and you have an idea about what you want to achieve, and then you bring this into your product with which you want to deliver value, and then you have to really close that feedback loop through validation. And I think kind of all of this ties together to really an entrepreneurial mindset.
Yeah. So what's the location for real estate is vision, value, validation for product owners.
That's right.
If you want to see it this way, right? I have a question for you, guys, and this is a little bit where we talk about Scrum and product ownership, but also how we tie it to the book and what readers can expect from that book. Scrum is pretty silent on how backlogs emerge in the first place. That there is a backlog and it's being prioritized and so forth. But obviously there's a ton of tools and techniques out there. You can read up or watch on YouTube and so forth about product ownership. But Scrum has stayed pretty silent around the process, or there is nothing about how backlog actually emerges because it's a framework, right? But what can readers expect from the book? How to fill that gap, or have techniques to come up with a backlog in the first place?
So one of the things we also kind of address really early on in the book is that usually every company has a vision where they want to go, where they see themselves, let's say 5 years down the road with digitalizations. And from that, they basically derive a business strategy. And then they take that strategy combined with their vision, and that they turn that into possible products and product candidates and so on. And then underneath, we have Scrum. And I think from a Scrum perspective, from a technology perspective, we have understood how to build good products. So the way I often describe it in my classes is the head knows where it wants to go. The feet would know how to get there. But in between, there's a disconnect, there's a vacuum. And if you're not really, we all know from physics class that a vacuum has the inner needs to fill itself. And if you're not really careful, this vacuum fills itself with busy work, mundane reports, status, milestones, and things like that. And this is also something that we see, that this gap, this vacuum needs to be filled through proper product ownership. So that means that our agile product manager, product owner actually reaches up into the higher levels of the company to really understand what they want to achieve, where they want to go, and bring that knowledge into the development team or teams if it's a bigger product. So really kind of connect and bridge the vacuum.
So there's some techniques in the book to come from vision and connect the vision, techniques for how to develop a vision in an agile fashion, and how to come up with an initial backlog for sprint one.
We talk about, when we cover in our product backlog management section, we really try to describe the backlog as a to-do list. Just like your to-do list don't have all the details needed to accomplish it. It is a way of working through just to make sure we don't forget things. How you actually populate it is up to you, but we do show we do give some suggestions and some examples. So we do cover user stories because reading the book is likely something that you're going to have to know about. But we make sure they understand that user stories are not part of Scrum. There's not one template to write user stories with. It's really about the conversations that you're creating from it. So we do cover that, and we also have this technique where we show how we do talk about story mapping, but in the other sense, we try to tie back everything in the product backlog back to the value propositions that we identify from the value chapter. So in the value chapter, we talk about business modeling and establishing value propositions for customer segments. And then when they're building their product backlog, we're asking them to then justify which value propositions each product backlog item aligns to. And if it doesn't, then we need to be able to justify that. Or if there are some value propositions that aren't represented in the product backlog, then that's something that they should be concerned with. So we still try to bring that strategic view of a product backlog in and sort of lower the need for the mechanics of how to write, how to fill in a user story template like as they want to, so that it takes sort of a secondary role to tying everything back to vision.
Well, I do have a question, and the answer might be a simple no, right? But I do want to ask it. While you guys were going through the writing process together, and Ralph, you're based out of Switzerland, and Don, you're based out of the US, did you see, while writing together and pairing together, any kind of differences, cultural differences, or between the two countries where you guys operate in and teach a lot, when you actually wrote the book and saw like product ownership there might be nuances or differences in product ownership in Germany or Switzerland or Europe in general versus the United States?
I think the short answer is yes.
Oh, okay.
So maybe let me just, I'm from Switzerland. In Switzerland, they're famous for their excellent mechanical watches they create. So they really like precision and, details. And so there's a little bit of a tendency to overplan the product backlog, whereas at least my experience is with the US, there's more like, let's give it a try. Would you agree with that, Don?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if I would equate it necessarily to the cultural stuff, but it might also be our styles as well. But I think it does have something to do with that. And there was plenty of time. What was really kind of eye-opening when writing the book is that we needed to be able to converge on certain things. And you get two experienced Agilists in a room, they're not going to agree on every little thing. But those conversations that we had, I think the end result became even better. Like that's where like the 3 Vs came out of, was like a bit of a debate. Or, the importance, should we put user stories in, should we not? And, there was a lot of how much emphasis should we put on like the Kinevin model and complexity, and a lot of our conversations were like that. And I think maybe it is a little bit more of the North American or Texas culture. But I found that a lot of the times the conversation was like, Ralph was a prolific writer. He would write all sorts of things. And a lot of times I was saying, let's cut this in half, or let's remove this. Do we really need to even talk about this? Do we need that level of detail? Or I don't agree with every little piece of this, so should we just get rid of it? And I was trying to rip too much out. And I think what we settled on, we ended up with a good sort of middle ground that worked out really well. Yeah. And there's some things I think even in the book that one of the things that we did was we decided to do these little call outs to talk about our own stories or our own experiments. So whenever there wasn't necessarily a converged agreement on something, we create these little blurbs. You see our little faces. We have little cartoon characters of our heads, and we can talk about our experiences and our thoughts. And I think that helped us a lot to just kind of break ourselves out of that. And yeah,
I gave recently a talk, and I asked just the audience. I asked them, how many of you guys use user stories, and a lot of hands went up. I asked a follow-up question, how many of you guys have a definition of done? Less hands went up. I asked how many have a definition of ready, and hardly any went up. Do you think those things are important, and is there any mentioning of that in your work?
Actually, there is. So definition of done is really important. And I've raised my question slightly different. So who of you is using Scrum? Many hands go up, pretty much all usually. So who of you has a definition of done? A couple of hands go down, which is good that most people have a thinking about what done means. But then I ask the question, who of you is doing proper refinement? And then less hands are there. So definition of ready, actually, I'm not that much of a proponent for that. So I'm not pro or fighting it, against or fighting it. For me, it's more like if somebody wants to work with it, fair enough. For me, ready, however, is a mindset. It's a mindset, a mental state that the development team needs to reach by having enough conversation, like the card conversation confirmation. And at some point, they say, we are ready to do it. And at this point, it's a candidate which can be put into a sprint. And sometimes ready means lots of details. We talk about specification by example in the book as well. Or maybe sometimes ready means 2 words and everybody knows what it means. And the risk with having, in my opinion, I think of the dons is that if you have a definition of ready, it becomes contractual. I have seen developers saying, we're not taking on this product backlog item. Why? You understand it? Yes, but this check mark is missing. We're not doing it.
Yeah.
But by having this conversation in the forefront, it's really about, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And at some point, the developer says, okay, we can do it. And this also means you can wing something in. Maybe in the last moment, something came up in the sprint review. The next day, you have the sprint planning and just anyway, let's give it a shot. We want to go for that.
Yeah, you'll find that. I kind of understand why so many hands go up with user stories because it seems so simple, right? Especially since the template was introduced. Like you said, I just have to fill in the blanks. They're not doing the difficult work.
That's right.
But when we say build a definition of done and then adhere to it, it's like, that sounds like a lot. We have to agree on something. We have to then follow it and use it a lot. Yeah. And so that's a lesson. But it is something that is talked about in Scrum. It's part of the Scrum guide, and being done at the end of a sprint is a core element of Scrum. So it's important. And exactly what Ralph said, we have a section in this about ready. Being ready is important, but using it as a contract is anti-agile, right? It's about customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So we ask in the book, if you're a product owner and you dream up of something the night before sprint planning, and it's like this new revolutionary thing that's going to take advantage of a market opportunity, and you rush into the sprint planning with this all excited, and you want the team to take this on maybe because it's the most important thing, what would be the most agile thing for the team to do? To say, no, go back and write some more acceptance criteria? Or to say, we don't know much about this, but if you're going to stick around and help us with it, we're willing to take it on. That's a good trusting environment and not just adhering to a definition of ready in a contractual way. So that's the danger we've seen with the definition of ready. It's an important goal. It's a good goal to have during refinement to get to ready, but it shouldn't be a contract. It shouldn't be held up as a yes/no thing.
That's a good viewpoint here. Ready as a mindset. Let me ask you similarly along those lines. Complexity, right? So we have Scrum it's doing very, very well at the edge of complexity, like complex projects. Most of IT projects fall into that category. But what does complexity do to the role of a product owner? And what's associated with that kind of role and work around complex projects? What's extra here for the role of a product owner? What does that complexity do to that role?
Well, we define complexity as, I guess, uncertainty, right? And so nobody knows the outcome of what we're building. And in that case, an empirical process is key. Scrum uses an empirical process control, and it allows us, I guess the key things we're looking for there is to create transparency so that we can inspect and adapt all elements that could be considered wasteful when everything is known in a defined, non-complex thing. It's like, why do we need to stop and look at this and get feedback when we know what we're building? If I'm building a car, I'm not going to stop halfway through just to make sure that the customer is good with the steering wheel we just put in. They just test drove it. They know what they want. So that can be considered wasteful. But in a complex world, like software typically is, we need to set up a situation where we create transparency, inspect, and adapt. And you can see that mapping very closely to vision, value, validation. Vision allows you not to have to define all the details, but so that makes sure everybody's working towards the same goal and they have the autonomy to figure out how. Value reminds us of how we define success, because what we're trying to do here is our customers have needs. They don't know how to solve them, and there's lots of ways to solve them. So defining value describes the needs, and then we can watch the value metrics differ in the way we hope them to. And then finally, the validation in a complex world is you don't know if we're doing the right thing. So Scrum provides us with the ability for a product owner to test out their hypothesis, which therefore manages risk before it's too late.
Yeah, Ralph, I don't know if you had any additional thoughts on complexity or...
I mean, the thing is then kind of often, as a product owner, or let's say you have something and you show something in your sprint review and your client tells you, oh, well, that's great, but it's not what I wanted. This is the complex is also defined through the unknown unknowns, the things we don't even know that we don't know them yet. So again, this is one of the other aspects why we have to have those empirical process controls with built-in feedback loops so that we can essentially emerge and discover what is the right technology. I mean, as a product owner, you have technical risks you need to tackle, but maybe also feature risks. You don't even know about all the features which the customer really wants. And this is, for me, in that regard, the product backlog is actually active risk management. You can't handle everything with your product backlog. You can handle a big chunk of it with your product backlog, the right order of your product backlog, and your definition of done. Other things are still outside of that, but this is really active risk management, in my opinion. And maybe just going back what Jocham said also about the vision, about having a clear goal but not really knowing the path yet. And in that regard, I think this is also the mechanisms about how you can really scale Scrum if you build a big product with several teams, because at some point, writing user stories for 7, 8, 9 development teams doesn't work anymore. You have to delegate that. You have to delegate that responsibility to the development team. And I call that sprint goal driven development. You give them maybe the next sprint goal, maybe an idea about what the next sprint goal after that could be. And you tell the teams, you guys, go ahead, figure out what you would do in that regard and show it to me, and I'll see what I think about it. And then you provide feedback, and that really makes suddenly refinement much more powerful.
Yeah, definitely.
That reminds me of a cool analogy that Ralph came up with for the book. He's like, vision's like the string or the thread that gives you direction, and then value are the pearls that you're putting on it over time. Yeah,
that's a good one. Yeah. Towards the end of our podcast here, I want to ask you a question around the role and the challenges of the role of the product owner as a whole. You have been writing about this now for a long time. You have been teaching this for a while. You're in front of a lot of students. Maybe somebody's listening to this right now in the role of a product owner who wants to become a product owner, or maybe it's somebody who is listening to this who is interfacing with the role of a product owner. But after all these years and the writing, maybe it's something we have talked about it already on this podcast, but what stands out to you as a real product owner challenge? And I want to make this make people feel comfortable. It's like you're not alone out there. Maybe there's something where you feel like this is a typical thing, students and people you have worked with in the past, which stands out as a typical product owner challenge. And maybe that's addressed in the book. Maybe there is something in there where you give some guidance around it. But just want to hear it's more like your personal thing here, right? What do you feel like is the challenge for product owners?
I guess I could kick it off. There's a few. The ones that there's one section where we really talk about where you see yourselves as a product owner. Are you the one receiving requirements and people are asking you to do things and you're just taking that to the team or writing it for the team? You're more that scribe or secretary that I mentioned earlier. Or do you find yourself as just the go-between person, the person that transports them back and forth? We call that the proxy. Both of these are more on the receiving side, and we see that that's a huge, very common pattern that we see out there in especially larger organizations. And all that does is create more delays, and it's hard to create the vision in that sense, or to hold the vision when you find yourself in that. So we talk about more practical ways of moving up that chain, to be more of a business representative, to understand more about the knowledge in the domain, or have more knowledge around the domain, and start being a source for requirements, start initiating new ideas instead. And then talking about get even further up, try to move into more of the sponsorship level where you have access to the budget. Do you even know what the budget is? How many? I ask this question all the time: is how many of you know how much your sprints cost? Right. And it's not a difficult thing to come up with, but it's something that really describes a product owner, is because this is about value. It's about return on investment. How do you know the return? How do you measure return without knowing what you're spending? So do you know what your sprint costing? And now do you feel you've gotten your money's worth every sprint? And that gets you into that more entrepreneurial mindset. So moving up that chain from scribe to proxy to business rep to sponsor to entrepreneur is the challenge I find that's out there. But there's some very practical ways of just moving up that ladder.
Okay.
And I think kind of what also Don said with the scribe and the proxy more towards on the left-hand side, kind of on the scale being the receivers, that also aligns more with the classical project management mindset, because you get something to get some scope, schedule, and budget, and you just have to make it happen somehow within that. And it's funny because I have one exercise I'm using in my Scrum trainings, and it's about managing budget, and everybody just puts it to the product owner. And they never have a problem with that. But once in the training you talk about, hey, the product owner is also responsible for the budget because this person owns the product, they suddenly look at you and they say, yeah, but this is not how it works for us. And it's just about how can you make judgment call about features? Maybe you have a feature which is really valuable and another one. But then suddenly it becomes interesting how much effort, how much is probably one of those costing. And then you can order your product backlog better.
No, this is an awesome idea, and thanks for the example, and Ralph. And I want to be honest, though. I just want to say this was an awesome conversation about product ownership, and whoever listened to that might have got some new ideas out of this podcast, but also a possibly good reason to pick up a book. This book, Professional Product Owner, available on the 14th of June on Amazon, and it's on pre-order already. I just want to say one more time, thank you to Ralph Jocham from Effective Agile and Don McGreal from Improving and the Tasty Cupcakes, wonderful website for facilitation techniques. I want to say thanks for your time and sharing your thoughts, and good luck with the book. And there's got to be a launch party or something like that. Is there anything in the making?
Yeah, Ralph, we need to get together and have a few pints. We talked about that before, but things have been so crazy.
Yeah, but I think they've been so busy at the end. At some point, the book is done, and you're just happy it's done, and you kind of forget about that. But Don and I, we both talk at Agile 2018 in San Diego, so that's a chance for us to.
That'll be the launch party. Yeah, you're all.
It's going to be a large party. Get your credit card ready. Thank you, both of you.
I'll open the tab.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Joe.
Thanks for having it. Yeah, thanks, Joe.
Thank you for listening to Agile.FM, the radio for the Agile community. I'm your host, Joe Krebs. If you're interested in more programming and additional podcasts, please go to www.agile.fm. Talk to you soon.